Hey Internet, and welcome back to Storycast. This is the episode where me and Andy make the internet get really mad at us. Um, Sometimes it's okay not having a huge audience, and this is one of those times because we're going to be talking about games that people either really love or really hate in ways that have resulted in internet mobs in other parts of the internet. So we're just gonna talk about some games that we really like, but that have some flaws that we acknowledge, but we like them in spite of them. In my case, I'm going to be talking about a game everyone really loves, and in Andy's case, he's going to be talking about one that has been controversial for some of its negative points, but actually has some good ones. So Andy, would you like to introduce what game you're going to be talking about?
Yes, so I'm going to be talking about Mass Effect Andromeda, which, if you've lived under a rock on the internet for the past month, you may have not known has been, taking a lot of fire for a lot of issues, but specifically there's some YouTube videos that can point out some of the, biggest flaws in the game, and people have just kind of snowballed on that.
It's been a little rough. People may have gotten a little carried away with going after people who worked and in some cases did not actually work on the game. But, that's the internet.
Yeah, and how about you talk about the game you want to discuss?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is a very high-profile game that came out. Turns out a lot of Zelda fans are very passionate, which is cool. Some of them are maybe a little too passionate because when a critic said that the game was good, he gave it a good review. That's important. But it moved the Metacritic score down by 1%. They DDoSed his website and harassed him for days and called him an awful person who was destroying the hard work of Mr. Aonuma and Mr. Miyamoto, which I would say is a pretty extreme reaction. I thought it was a really good game, but I also think that it had some issues and some things that I would like to see corrected in the future because the base of what was there was really good.
The thing that gets me about what happened in that particular case is that he was pretty open about the fact that the things he didn't like a game more or less were his personal taste.
Yes. And that's what I mean, people have different tastes. I mean, there are plenty of people who gave Breath of the Wild 10 out of 10, and that's perfectly cool. I would not give it a 10 out of 10. I would say that Jim Sterling, I don't think I mentioned him earlier. He was the one who gave this particular review. I think he gave it a 7 or an 8.
Yeah, he gave it like a 7 or 7.5 or something.
Yeah, I would probably put it like an 8 or a 9. Like, I wouldn't put it at a 10, but I wouldn't put it at a 5. And, I think we've gotten to this point, and I'm sure it plays into Andromeda too, to some extent, where people assume that anything below a 9 out of 10 is garbage.
Yeah, I think that's been the case for a while, though. At least in some of the places I look, I've seen it kind of the range of acceptable scores is kind of spread out a little bit over time, and some of the critics have been a little bit more willing to take it down, but still say the game's good.
Right, and I think there's anything above a 70 is good, and anything below a 70 is seen as bad. I think because of school, honestly, because anything below a 60 is failing. But sometimes the 10 is a lot of numbers, and there's a really big spectrum there. And then you have the other hand where you have people I know IGN is kind of the one people always go after for giving everything a 10. Even if in the review they list negative points, which would make it not perfect, which you would assume a 10 out of 10 is. So I mean, review scores are kind of a mess anyway.
Yeah, and it's hard to review the game and not talk a lot about the bad things about the game, especially when it is a good game.
Yeah.
I feel because you want to bring those up, but then maybe you talk about them too much.
Right, and I think Andromeda kind of suffers from the opposite, where people got so obsessed with some of the animation stuff and some of the kind of either funny or kind of shoddy aspects of the very surface of it, that it wasn't until I've seen this week that a lot of people I follow who were making fun of the game last week are now playing it and they're starting to really like it. And it's just a weird thing where the game kind of presented itself in a negative way.
I think the way they handled their promotion leading up to release was especially bad.
Was it?
The whole early access thing for streamers, like you got to play 10 hours, but only up to a certain point in the campaign, and
Oh, right.
and basically that's a lot of that section. It has a lot of the worst stuff in the game because it's just a game that gets off to a really slow start and picks up over time.
Right.
And
So if you're only
basically
seeing that
because
10 hours.
like the main story stuff is even less than 10 hours. So you're really only seeing a small part of the game, and it's not even a particularly flattering part of the game. But since the embargo didn't lift until the day before release or something, that's basically all people got to see for like 5 days before it came out.
Right. That's rough. And didn't, I mean, I know a lot of people kind of gone after BioWare. Didn't BioWare not even produce it in-house? Like, wasn't it kind of outsourced to a BioWare, like, adjacent company?
So it was previously some other EA-owned studio or something in Montreal, and then that studio helped to develop Mass Effect 3.
Right.
And then after Mass Effect 3 came out and the support for that ended, the original team started working on some super secret new IP that they still haven't announced yet. And I guess because they felt like still making stuff in this setting, it kind of went to that team because they were the next best thing. Like, they had the most experience with the series outside of the Edmonton studio.
Right, right. And I mean, that's not, I'm not saying that to kind of put blame on a different person. Like, I don't think,
I mean, I'll talk a bit more about it. I wouldn't necessarily blame them, but it was like a high. They had a lot to overcome, and it's not like it was all new people. They did have some people who stayed over from the old team, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah, but in any case, I think we can agree that regardless of who makes a game and the quality that it ends up being, maybe going after them and like doxing them and sending them, threatening letters is not a reasonable response to the quality of a video game.
No, it's not.
I mean,
I of all people understand that people will get passionate about these things, especially this particular series, but it's still not a good response.
Yeah, Mass Effect has kind of a reputation now for controversies. Their fan base is very, very, I mean, Zelda is the same way. I think Zelda in the past too has had kind of a very fervent, the Nintendo fan base, I think, is very
people got fervent. really upset over Skyward Sword, and I thought that game was fine.
That is my favorite Zelda game. This game I thought was very, very good. Does not touch Skyward Sword for me. And that's a whole, can of worms on its own, but I love it.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite's always been Twilight Princess, and I always seem to be an odd one out because of that.
That's I think that's the only main line Zelda game I've never played, and I really should at some point.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
But let's have you talk a little bit more in depth about kind of Mass Effect Andromeda and the things you liked and the things you didn't, and how it all kind of came together as a package for you.
Okay, there's a lot of stuff here, and even though it's not the longest RPG I've played by a long shot, there's kind of a lot to unpack, so should I start with the good or the bad?
I'm going to say dealer's choice on that. How do you want to present it?
I guess I'll start with the bad because it's probably what most people have heard about at least.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
And so you kind of mentioned earlier that there's like, the big thing was like the animations. Like, it is true sort of that the videos people put online like are the worst parts of that. But it's also true that, like, they aren't particularly good either.
So for people who haven't, like, seen it, what's going on with these animations? Like, what's the deal?
I've tried to kind of narrow it down the time I was playing the game to figure it out, because it's one of those things that you notice, but you can't necessarily describe in words the first time you see it.
Right.
Some of it is just kind of like general stiffness, I guess, in the animations, if that makes sense. And I think that's kind of been something that has been in their games for a while, but it's compounded with a few other just kind of strange things. Like, they almost do nothing with the upper half of the face, so there's almost like no emotiveness with the eyes, and that is like a huge uncanny valley thing.
Right.
And then also, they'd also have a lot of times where they just do like close-up shots of that, and they don't have a lot of body language involved, and I think that also kind of throws things off a little bit. And
so it just looks kind of weird.
yes, it looks kind of weird, and then like occasionally there will be times where it's like actually like completely terrible, and you might
Hmm.
like laugh at it, and that happened to me too. But there are also times where it's actually like quite good, or at least like up to what I would expect.
Right.
And one of the problems with the game in general, I'd say, is just that there's not a huge amount of consistency. You'll go from like hot to cold within a few minutes of each other sometimes even.
So it's not like the whole game looks like that. It's just certain scenes or close-ups and things like
Yeah,
that.
and
It's
it's
not like
like it's not even like that it's a few times during the game. The reason that it's like a problem is that it's not all the time, but often enough that it kind of is always floating around in your head.
right. That's so strange.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe it sounds kind of like nitpicking to talk about it like that, but when you're playing one of these RPGs, a lot of the time you're in conversations, and so it does matter.
Yeah, in Fallout 4, I got a glitch during the first conversation I had in the game, and it's maintained the entire game, which is that during conversation, my character will be facing the other way sometimes. Where
Yeah.
like normally they'd be facing the camera. She'll be facing the other way, but then dramatically turn around to face the camera mid-sentence. And it actually, depending on the line, sometimes it looks really sassy and cool. But it was one of those things that just sometimes it wouldn't happen for a couple of hours, and then I would be having a conversation with the wall again. And it's in a game like that, immersion is a big part of it.
Yeah, now you bring that up, I know that there's like a couple conversations in Andromeda where it kind of bugged out or something happened, and then the person I was talking to was not where the camera was focusing, and they were just like off shot or something.
I've seen one of those with them like walking around in the background while they're talking to you.
Yeah, and then there's
This is
other
kind of
just like
funny.
there's things that aren't even necessarily bad, but are just kind of amusing. There's a conversation really near the end of the game I had where you could see over my character's shoulder, sort of blurry in the background, there's a dude who just like walked up to a console and then like climbed on top of it and stood there for a while.
That is incredible.
And that's the sort of thing that's more funny than bad, but
I mean, at some point, if you're enjoying the game enough, at some point you can laugh at that sort of thing.
yeah, and I
Um,
mean, I there were times that I laughed when things were actually terrible because it was
right.
impossible not to, but it also kind of hurt a little on the inside because I love the series so much. I wanted
Oh yeah, for
this to
sure.
like basically what it comes down to is I wanted this to be like the next big fresh start for the series. And I think it kind of is, but because of a lot of the issues with the game, it came out stumbling really hard.
Yeah, I think there must have been a lot of pressure on this game because after finishing a giant trilogy and finishing a giant trilogy that was very controversial at the end, there's a lot. It's tough to follow that up with a new story
Yeah,
and
and
get
I mean,
people invested.
I think that, I mean, what it comes down to is you basically have to make this game justify why you're going back to what's essentially a finished story. I mean,
Yes,
the whole idea was
exactly.
not to do the same story,
Right.
and I guess apparently the idea to explore a different galaxy was something that they had, like that they came up with the original team,
I think
kind of
that's a
on a
good
broad
call in
concept.
general. Like I think that was a good way to go. It's tough to and it takes place, I believe, before Mass Effect 3, right?
Well, yeah, so what happens is you end up leaving the Milky Way between 2 and 3, but then you spend 630 something years in transit.
Oh, right. So there aren't like, reapers everywhere or whatever.
No, they apparently don't hang out in the Andromeda Galaxy as far as we know.
Cool. Yeah, I think that was a good way to go. It's tough to follow something like that up, and I think it's better to just kind of get a
Yeah,
fresh
and if
start.
you didn't want to, like, there's no way you could possibly, like, follow that up exactly, and if you were going to do anything else there, you'd have to dance around a lot of what had already been done.
Right.
I think you could do it, but it would be really hard and impose a lot of constraints on pretty much every aspect of the game. Okay. I've talked about the lack of consistency in the game, and that's more than just sort of the technical stuff, and when I say technical stuff, I mean like the animations like we talked about, but there's also just general performance, and then there's just strange bugs, like there's been times where I was trying to do a quest and then suddenly something would stop me from advancing it and the worst I would ever have to do is just reload the game.
Right.
But, it's stuff that kind of sticks out when you're kind of getting in the groove, going around doing stuff, and then suddenly you have to stop.
Not to call out Bethesda, but that sounds like a Bethesda thing.
Yeah, that absolutely sounds like a Bethesda problem.
Like they make some very fun games, but they are very let's say shoddily constructed. Yeah.
I mean, there's just a ton of interlocking stuff, and when you have a game like that, there's always going to be stuff going wrong that you can never catch in QA.
Right. But it's frustrating to have to halt your progress, go back, reload. Like, that's just not the gameplay loop you want to have your players in.
And then the other thing is, like, the writing is also kind of inconsistent. Like, normally I'm okay with some, like, corny or cheesy stuff, but like sometimes it's very good, and on sort of like the broad level, I like a lot of what's going on in the game.
Right.
But then you get into some of the details, and like it has that thing where like some of the dialogue is people saying the thing that you should be like interpreting from what they're saying, if you get what I mean. Sort of it's like the show Don't Tell thing, but with dialogue. And so I feel like they're almost being a bit too heavy-handed sometimes. I don't know like the story behind the development of this game exactly, because obviously it's always just rumors unless they kind of come up and say it. But what I've heard is that like this suffered sort of in the same way that Final Fantasy 15 did, in that it spent too long in development, but they got too little time to actually develop the game. And this kind of leads into what I was saying about it being like the new team in Montreal. I'm not blaming them for anything. In fact, I feel like in a sense they were almost kind of like set up against something that they probably just weren't super well equipped to handle, because this is the first AAA game that I think the studio's ever done on its own, and then they were asked to make a new game in a like well-respected trilogy that was running on new and in like notoriously complicated technology, and it was also going to be open world.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. I think that's a huge challenge for any studio, let alone kind of a newer one or a smaller one.
I think for like I feel like for their first venture into that sort of thing, since that's almost like it's an open world RPG running on like cutting edge technology, is probably one of the hardest types of games you could make.
Absolutely.
And I'm not really like excusing some of the issues with the game, but I think that they did pretty well considering that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can look at the quality of something and acknowledge that there's a problem with it, but also that, it's making things is difficult. Like, it's legitimately difficult, and making games is really expensive. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts. And probably, I assume, because basically every video game is like this, they probably didn't have nearly as much time as they wanted to work some of this stuff out.
Yeah. I mean, that it seems very clear that some of the issues are kind of things that I think are just there, but I think a lot of it also comes down to a lack of polish. Like some of the worst scenes that I was talking about earlier, it seems like that they just didn't really have time to actually fully like basically do like the digital shooting and animating.
Right. So they just kind of had to go with what they had and get it out the door.
Yeah. And they're going to be talking about soon what they plan on doing to improve the game, and nobody's really sure exactly what that's going to take the shape of, but
right.
I mean, it kind of, obviously it all kind of comes down to what the publisher's willing to let them do, but I think that part of the reason they hadn't announced anything like DLC plans before, like a lot of companies do now, is that they were going to kind of wait and see what people say and then figure out what to do from there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely sure that they knew that they were going to have to spend some time kind of fixing it up.
Yeah.
You made the comparison to Final Fantasy 15, and I think it's a really apt comparison, because that was another game where they released that without certain things and kind of knowing that there were deficiencies in the story that they're now going back and trying to fix. But, that took months.
Yeah.
It took months. They had to record new voice stuff in, 4 languages. Like, there's a lot of work involved. It's not something where you can just kind of go patch the game.
I'm hoping that maybe they kind of take that as an example and shows like they can commit to making some like hefty improvements to the game, even though I don't think they'll ever be able to fix everything that's wrong.
Right. But I think you can at least kind of improve it and address some of the concerns to, whatever.
Like one other thing is like there's kind of a lot of comparisons I think that I could make to the original Mass Effect, and a lot of people hate me for that, but that game is also fun, but I also think that game has a ton of annoying and problematic things. One of the things that kind of brought me back to that is like the inventory menus are terrible, and that's like I feel like they tried to draw on the original game because a lot of people love it, and it kind of tried to explore some of the same themes, but not as deeply.
Right.
And so they brought back, the vehicle and exploration, and so they also brought back some of the like more RPG-y mechanics, like now you have weapons and armor that you can loot and upgrade. But like those inventory menus are kind of bare bones and annoying to navigate. And like the quest menu is annoying to navigate because everything's like what they had in their BioWare's previous game, Dragon Age Inquisition. The quest menu would like drop down things, and so you could like collapse and expand quests for different areas or different plot lines and stuff. In this, it's like a folder menu, so you have to like go into a category, and then it like opens up a separate menu that has like all those quests, and so it's hard to keep track of everything at once.
That's irritating. Menu design in RPGs is so important.
Yeah, and that's just one of those it's one of those little things, but you're using that interface so often in the game that it just gets annoying over time. I guess I've talked about sort of a lot of the technical stuff, but I think the other thing that the game suffers from the most is that, and this is kind of something I feel like they do a lot in their games, but they have a villain that they kind of set up in a way that it looks like they could be interesting, and then they kind of build up some more interesting things with them going into like the first third of the game or so, and then they kind of drop the ball in like the last 2/3 of the game. They just either don't capitalize on it, or in this case he just kind of gets less interesting throughout the story, because they set up a lot of really interesting things they could do with the main villain, and then he just kind of becomes more and more cliche as the game goes on.
Right. Does the villain like get dealt with, or is he gonna come back and possibly grow? Or
the villain gets dealt with, which is cool. I think after like the way Mass Effect 3 ended, they were maybe gonna just try and go for something a little bit simpler this time, and I think in terms of how they planned it out, that was fine for this, but I just don't like he just kind of turns into a generic supervillain, and so you deal with him, and then it's kind of implied at the end, though they aren't like setting up super hard for anything, because I think they were kind of testing the waters here. If they do come back in another game, then it would be like his second in command, who I think is potentially more interesting anyway, because he was more directly tied to some of the interesting things they set up with that group. Like for example, I guess I'll just kind of say generally what their shtick is.
Yeah, go for it.
So the main villains are a alien species that actually is also not native to the place you end up in Andromeda, and showed up like 70 years before the Andromeda Initiative. And they've been at war with the native species the whole time they've been there, and sort of their deal is they seem to send out like armies into different parts of the galaxy, and they conquer and kidnap the people there and do tests on them so that they can like find the best aspects of like their genetics and incorporate them into themselves, and then like turn people into more of them. In addition, like layered on top of that is like it seems to have an almost sort of semi-religious significance to them.
So it's like kind of like a ritual.
Yeah, like
as opposed to just a medical thing they're doing.
Like, yeah, it's not purely scientific. There's also some sort of weird ritualistic or religious significance to it, because the mission where you find out a lot of this stuff, it takes place in a sort of prison/laboratory/temple sort of thing.
That's cool. I mean, it at least sounds like an interesting concept.
Yeah, like it's not necessarily the most original or interesting thing, but it is more original and interesting than where they end up taking like the head of the army that's here.
Right.
Because the thing that separates him from the rest is that he's discovered the same technology that you've been using in the story, and that you've been using it to terraform planets so that you can settle there. But he also sees the technology as a potential like sort of secure a victory across the entire sector at once, and he just
Right.
becomes obsessed with it. And I feel like even that could have been played in an interesting angle, but that just didn't come together.
Would you say that the final act of the game in general kind of felt like that? It was more just the villain
It was really more
specifically.
just him because if I was going to talk about, if I'm thinking about like the last third of the game, they do a lot of cool stuff there. There's a lot of really interesting reveals in terms of some of the mysteries they build up throughout the plot. It's just that none of those things are related to him.
Right.
Because
So it just
like,
feels kind of disconnected.
I don't even know if he feels disconnected. He just feels like he's not on the same level as some of the other things that are going on. Because the other like mystery that's part of the main plot is I was talking about this technology that used to terraform planets. It's pretty much already there when you show up, and the first planet you go to has all these crazy lightning storms on them and is like half destroyed. It was originally supposed to be the planet the humans were going to settle on because they took their observations back in the Milky Way and saw like this place seems like it would be habitable for humans, but then you show up and there's this huge astrophysical anomaly around that has messed up with everything, including this technology on the planet, and has caused it to go haywire, and now the planet's completely unlivable.
Oops.
And so you're part of the Pathfinder team, so you go land on the surface to figure out what's going on, and you end up more or less figuring out how you can interface with it to shut it down and so you can leave. And what makes you kind of special in interfacing with this is the reason you can do it is you have an artificial intelligence that's directly connected to your brain and body more or less. And playing up that sort of the AI's name is Sam, and he ends up being a more interesting character than I was going to that I thought at first. He seems like he's just kind of, your generic computer AI guy who processes information for you, but he ends up being an important part of one of the side stories.
I feel like AI characters tend to be really popular. Like if you do them all, like I know like Data
Yeah,
on Star
like,
Trek is
I
very
mean, they had the
popular.
one in the original trilogy, Edie, and I was kind of worried it might be kind of a rehash, but
Mm-hmm.
I actually ended up liking him more, and I think that's just because of how he ties into the plot, because the AI, Sam, was developed by the like senior Ryder, which for those of you who don't know much about the game, you play either Sarah or Scott Ryder, who are twins, and the original Pathfinder on the ship you guys are on is your father, who's like this big badass military hero, but he was dishonorably discharged after they found out he was creating this AI because AI research is illegal.
Huh.
And but he ended up continuing to develop it for the Andromeda initiative, and he made it even more advanced than they knew about, which is plays into it interfacing directly with your mind and body.
Right.
And so what and so he ends up basically passing it along to you, and so he's tied into a story that kind of relates to figuring out some of the things behind the scenes with what was going on with the senior writer in developing Sam and the things that led up to the initiative leaving the Milky Way.
That's why I like that it's connected. That it's all kind of, I don't know, it
Yeah,
makes everything feel a little more like a living world, and like the
yeah,
characters actually matter.
yeah. I mean, it seems like it's gonna be kind of like that Bethesda thing where they get a cool voice actor to do like the first hour or so of a game and then they die, but then his character ends up being part of the story for a long time into it if you pursue that side thread.
That's cool because I hate that. I hate when there's like a really cool, interesting character
I do
that's like a really big draw and they just get killed off.
Yeah, I do think they could have stood to have him be around a little bit longer, because one of my issues with kind of the development of the protagonist is that I feel like you could have done with more time with Alec Ryder in the story kind of being a mentor, or at least, because basically he passes it along to you and they kind of play it, you not really knowing what you're doing and people not believing that you're capable for a while, but that almost disappears instantly, and I feel like playing up that struggle for more of the story would have been interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah, and so I mean I was talking about kind of the side thread with Sam and how there's kind of a mystery there. And I think where the story succeeds the most is that both the main story and a lot of the important side stories have some sort of mystery behind them. And I think that fits in really well with the like one of the main themes of the game is exploration and discovery. Right. And so I think it was really smart of them to include a lot of unknown factors in all these stories. Like, there's the alien technology that you need to use to terraform planets. It's very extensive and advanced, but you don't know where it came from. And you really only kind of like the most bare bones knowledge of how it works.
So the actual, like, the world building of the game seems really good then.
Yeah, I'd say the world building is pretty good. There's a ton of, like, just, you know, if you're into finding the nitty-gritty details of stuff, you can go around and read tons of, like, data pads or stuff on consoles. Or just, like, I think there are even, like, when you're walking around in hubs or whatever, you can hear people talking. Yeah, I think that aspect's good. I feel like they could have been a little bit more bold with the new setting. Like, there are okay reasons why you really only interact with 2 new alien species in this game, because, like, the explorable area that you're in is only a small fraction of the entire Andromeda galaxy, but it still feels like, because you have, like, maybe half of the Milky Way species coming along with you, it sometimes feels like the new stuff's still getting kind of drowned out by the familiar.
Yeah, I think it's tough to strike a balance with kind of what people want to see.
Yeah, and it's like, I'd really not want to play a Mass Effect game, like, without the Turians or something, but I was kind of hoping, like, for more crazy new stuff.
Yeah.
And for the most part, like, there is new stuff, but it's not even, like, super far out there. So, like, yeah, I mean, I like the design of the friendly alien species you meet. They're called the Angara, but they don't look super alien, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's always kind of a thing in sci-fi, where, and even in fantasy, I guess we get, like, the races kind of all look a little too...
Yeah, but I mean, like, in Mass Effect, there's kind of some precedent. Like, you have the Hanar, they're like the jellyfish people, and so I feel like some of that was maybe a little bit lacking. I think one thing that kind of draws me in, though, is, aside from just the exploratory science fiction, which is something I'm kind of more interested in than... I mean, Mass Effect Trilogy, I feel like, was heavily, like, political sci-fi, in a way. Right. And that's cool, and I like that, but I guess I didn't realize how much I wanted a more exploratory science fiction story until I started playing this game. Because even if it's not always, like, blowing my mind necessarily, just the fact that there's something new around every corner is kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sets up a certain mood that I think is really fun, and that you can only really do in sci-fi on that scale.
Yeah. I think a good analogy that I have made a couple times is that, you know, there was plenty, of course, that was new to the player when they started playing the trilogy, and playing through the trilogy is kind of like going to a city that you've never been to before and just kind of wandering the streets. But Andromeda is actually like going out into the, like, wilderness and seeing stuff nobody's ever seen before.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that.
So, yeah, and one of the things that they feed into this that has actually annoyed a lot of people, but not me so much, is the galaxy map is just kind of like a map in previous games, but they put a ridiculous amount of effort into it in this game. Like, every system you can go to on this map is a fully 3D modeled, like, complete with fancy lighting and special effects area that when you go from place to place, like, you actually get this short little thing where you fly from one planet to the next or whatever.
Yeah, you sent me some screenshots of it, and it looks incredible.
It's gorgeous, and
it looks so good.
When I was kind of going back to play a little bit of the other games, just to kind of give myself a frame of reference a bit, and they do not even touch how good looking some of these places look.
Yeah.
And the thing that annoyed people about it is just like that there's no way to turn off the little cutscene from when you want to fly from one place to another.
Oh, yeah.
And I I agree with the idea that like it was cool to kind of have in that feeling that you're really traveling from one place to another, and it gives you like a sense of physical space to the game world. But
Yeah, for
then,
sure.
but I know that that sort of thing is always going to annoy some people, and so there should always be an option to turn it off.
I absolutely agree. You should always if there's a cutscene that is going to play kind of as a matter of course, like
Yeah,
it's just getting you from one place to the other and it's not part of loading or anything, you should be able to skip it, even if it's amazing.
yeah. I wouldn't turn it off. I love it. Um, I've always been interested in space, and just kind of getting the good space views is enough for me to put up with the like 5-10 seconds you take flying from place to place.
Yeah.
So, along with the exploration, the other thing I like about the tone of the story is pretty much just like how optimistic it is. Even when things get kind of bad, you have this more casual, young, and laid back crew in this game as opposed to the previous ones, and at least the way that I played my character, he's always kind of like, yeah, I got this, don't worry about it. And he was kind of a doof at times, but I think that annoyed people. Like, he's this kind of young, self-assured, dorky sort of guy at times, and with a lot of, like, stupid lines. But I think that was more intentional than some people give it credit for.
Right.
And I don't know, especially after Mass Effect 3, which is probably, like, the most consistently depressing game that I've ever played in my life. Like, it is just,
Yeah.
it's like the road bleak the entire time. And that's
Are the stakes lower, would you say, in this game compared to, like, obviously to 3, but like compared to Mass Effect 1, would you say that like the stakes are kind of lower? Or?
I mean the stakes were always super high in Mass Effect.
Right.
They specifically were trying to dial back exactly how, I guess, grim it was in this game. And it's
Which
not like,
I'm in favor of.
yeah, it's not like it's not high stakes. I mean, you've got pretty much everybody you got the lives of pretty much everybody that came over at stake. But it's also like not, if you don't succeed at everything, the entire galaxy will die.
Right. So there's room for a little levity.
Yeah, and they definitely make a lot of room for that. I mean, I sent you the short recording I took. Like, they have the movie night on the ship, and that's...
Oh yeah, that was really cool. That was like a fun little scene.
Yeah, I mean,
that sort of thing is really important to me, especially when you have like a big team like that.
Yeah, and the build up to it is kind of funny too, because it just starts off with one of them casually saying that you should have a movie night to blow off some steam for everybody, and
yeah,
what proceeds is like throughout almost the entire game for like the next 30 hours, every once in a while somebody emails you saying that they have a better idea for what we should be doing for movie night, and they send you off to go do something for them.
That's funny.
And so, I mean, those quests aren't even like intricate or anything. It's basically just going to a place and like getting a thing. But I think it just kind of adds some character to the whole thing. So one complaint about the game is that there's kind of a lot of like filler content in it. Like, a lot of the open world stuff is more or less boring and kind of busy work.
Yeah.
And I think I agree with that. But for pretty much the first time in my life, I like exercised a great degree of self-restraint when I was playing an RPG, and like I pretty much just skipped over anything that didn't look like it had some sort of meaningful story content.
Are you normally like kind of a completionist? Like you have to do
not
everything?
like 100% completionist, but like I try to hit up important looking stuff or do all the missions.
Right.
But I just decided not to waste my time. Like, I drove around most of the planets to most of the places you can go, but I didn't stop to see every tiny little thing that you could do. I didn't do every, like, random nonsense quest that people would hand off to you. And I think that was a good idea, because the game's still long enough. It took me about 40 hours to finish the campaign, which is kind of like my ideal length for one of these games.
Yeah, that's kind of my sweet spot too.
And then I basically just got to hit up the stuff that was actually interesting, and so that basically amounts to the main story. There's the previously mentioned plot hook about Sam and Alec Ryder, There's all of your companions have their own like mini quest line that kind of ends in a slightly more detailed and interesting mission at like a unique location. Like that's kind of they tried to make that a returning feature for Mass Effect 2. They had like the loyalty missions, and those
Yeah.
were all super popular, so they kind of brought those back. They're a little bit different now, but I think for the most part they were pretty good. And then also there's like the last thread is involving what happened to the other species, because obviously you were on like the human ship that came over, but there were supposed to be 4 others for the other council races, which is like the Turians, Asari, and Solarians. And you find out when you get to like the central hub that you were the only ones that showed up. And so one of the other mysteries that you can explore throughout the game is finding what happened to the other ones.
Oh, cool.
And I think between just like some maybe casual exploring, a little bit of other side questing, and doing the main story, that's pretty much what I filled out my time with. I guess I've gone pretty far without like specifically talking about the party members in this game, and that seems to be like an important part of these games to most people. So I guess for the most part, it's almost kind of hard to compare them to the previous cast because the game itself is different in tone, and so they're specifically kind of trying to look to bring in a different type of character.
Yeah.
Like in Mass Effect 2, which was the most party-centric of the series since it was about getting a really robust party, like that whole thing was like finding the most skilled, talented, or deadly people in the galaxy and putting them onto one ship. This is more about you have the people that you are already working with, and then you kind of pick up a few odd tag-alongs along the way, and I think like half of them join without you even really asking, which is kind of weird. But then there's this sort of, it's more like a weird sort of dysfunctional family sort of thing than like a badass military crew. There's a scene sort of near the start of the game where you have like your first crew meeting and you show up and the Krogan on your team, Drac, he's like, yeah, I put my stuff in the kitchen, so I guess I'm just gonna stay there now. And like the Asari PV, she has like attachment issues, and so she lives in the escape pod. And so I think they tried to set up a different tone. As far as like trying to qualify or compare the quality, I'd say for the most part they don't really have like too many bad characters in this team, but there are only like 2 standouts out of the 6, and one of them is Jal, who's the crew member you get from the new alien species that's not trying to kill you.
Yeah.
It's hard to talk about like what's cool about him because it's a lot of it comes down to just the fact that I guess it's the fact that he's new, so he offers like a new insight and perspective. I know it sounds kind of weird, but it's also like the way he talks, which I can't even really explain. But just like the pace of how he talks and like the intonation, I think is just kind of, at least for me, it was kind of like attention grabbing.
Yeah, that's a huge thing for me. It's something, and even more now since starting YouTube and like recording stuff and listening to the way that I talk, like the way that people talk, I realize has been like a huge thing. Like, just as a real quick example. I watch Poppy videos, and if you don't know who Poppy is, you Google or YouTuber. One of the main draws for me is the way that they edit the audio and the way that she talks, which is really robotic and monotone, and something about it just like almost in an ASMR way. Like I don't listen to ASMR, like it doesn't really get me, but like someone talking at like a normal volume, not whispering in my ear because it's weird for me. Like the way that someone talks can definitely be like a really endearing trait to me, so I totally get what you're talking about. But I think that it's tough to knowing that you're bringing back some of the older races. There's always going to be comparisons to the characters people remember from the other games. So I think it's really tough to design a new crew around those kind of same races and viewpoints.
Yeah, and I think to their credit, they didn't do any characters that felt like rehashes of previous ones, and I think that would have been a recipe for disaster if they tried that. Because those old characters are so beloved by people who played the series.
Oh yeah.
I guess they fall into their own sort of like tropes, sort of like Drac the Krogan is kind of like the grumpy old man because he's over 1,000 years old or something, and he calls you kid. And like that's kind of cliche, but I like him anyway.
Yeah.
Like especially since most of the crew is young and wide-eyed, sort of having the grumpy old guy around to sort of offset that, I felt was something that was kind of needed.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So going back to Jal, I mean, part of it is the way he talks, and then I think he has probably some of the best voice acting in the game and some of the most consistent too. I guess part of it is that he's initially very mistrustful of you too, because I mean, when you show up and meet his people, like, you're the aliens, I guess, and they introduce them along with that in a kind of clever way, and none of them like you at first because the last time they had aliens show up, they started a war, and it was bad.
I can understand that then, yeah.
And so there's a lot of interesting development between your character and his, and there was a point where, based on some of the choices I had made, he got angry at me, wouldn't talk to me for a while. And I said there were two standouts on this crew, and the other one is Vetra, who joins you pretty early on in the game. I think more than just being my favorite character in this game, I think she's probably one of my favorite characters in the entire series. And that just comes down to like a personal thing for me. Like the first thing that is going on when you meet her, it's when you're going to get your ship for the first time, and I don't remember this scene perfectly, but basically what's going on is she's loading stuff onto your ship that will be like useful supplies for you, but you're technically not supposed to have, but she's like a mercenary smuggler and has tons of connections, and so she just kind of like gets you the stuff anyway. And so, like, the first thing you basically learn about her when you meet her is that she is a goal-oriented problem solver and is not afraid to kind of skirt on the wrong side of the law and get her hands dirty.
Yeah.
And in general, she's just, like, extremely competent at almost everything that she is there to do, which is kind of another contrast to, at least especially like Ryder, the main character, who's still trying to get a feel for a lot of things. But then, you know, when you get to know her, she has an interesting soft spot, which you probably saw it coming that she would have a soft spot. But I think it is interesting for her because it comes in the form of like her relationship with her younger sister, who she's raised from childhood and is actually like a character that is on the main station that you can meet and is involved in a few side quests herself.
Oh, cool.
And so it's kind of like the combination of the both of them, kind of her backstory, and I'm not going to spoil it even though this is a spoilers video beyond that, because I think it's just kind of worth figuring out on your own.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
And so I think that kind of hits up the main points I wanted to talk about. A couple of miscellaneous things, I guess, is one thing I liked about the game is that I felt like in a few ways it felt more classic sci-fi than Mass Effect did, like the trilogy.
That's something I've heard a lot, actually.
Because, I mean, like I said before, the trilogy was like political sci-fi, but this goes into some more, I guess, classic territory where you got the exploration. One of the things that's in the game is kind of like, it's not like a Dyson sphere exactly, but it's something that's even kind of weirder in a way, which I don't know if you're familiar with what a Dyson sphere is.
I'm trying to think. I watched a video about Dyson spheres like
it's the general idea is that like it's a artificial construct that's built around a star system so that can harvest all the energy output by the star.
Yeah.
And so that's not what this thing is. But it is like a weird artificial structure that almost is kind of more interesting and strange, and that it ends up being basically like the focus of the plot in the last third of the game.
Right.
I guess I can talk more about it. This is a spoiler video, and I don't feel as bad about spoiling this one. Basically, as you're searching for like more information on these terraforming machines on all these planets, you discover that there's like a central hub for all of them. And it's called Meridian, or at least that's what you call it in the game. And so you go on a mission and figure out where Meridian is, and then you fly there, figure out like, you know, the bad guy aliens, the Ket, are already there and have set up shop, but you kind of you send off a distraction, and then you like land on there and do your thing. And then you find out like the city you're at is not actually Meridian. Meridian's like this mechanical sphere thing that they had there that is what enables all the terraforming around the cluster to happen. And so then the last mission is basically you getting all the people together that you've helped out up to this point in the game, and you fly out and try to gain control of Meridian before the main villain does, because he's going to use it to basically make all the planets everyone else is on unlivable, so they either die or have to basically submit to them. And it gets kind of funky, because like you fly out, you figure out where it ended up after getting spaced, and you follow them there. And so you see this giant spherical thing out in space, and you're like, okay, what is this thing? And then like it opens up, and the main villain takes the ship and flies inside, and you follow him, and like on the inside is like a completely livable world, complete with like water and green stuff and light.
Oh wow.
But then what ends up happening actually is like the main human ship in the process of this battle crashes into there, and so it can't take off again because that wasn't really the thing it was designed to do.
Right.
And so when you finally finish the battle, the inside of this thing is now like the human homeworld, basically.
Oh, cool.
And that's kind of like the point the game leaves off on with regards to that.
Right.
So, I mean, it's implied that you have control of the network, but it's also implied that there's a lot more going on, because the people who made it aren't around, and you find out that both the reason that they're gone, the reason that this thing had to get spaced, and the reason that all of their stuff is malfunctioning is because they had somebody that was fighting against them, and apparently they succeeded to a degree because like this massive astrophysical anomaly that's been messing up everything around the entire cluster was some sort of weapon created by those people. And so you're talking about like weird science fiction weaponry and technology on a like more than planetary scale, which I don't...
Yeah.
Like, you kind of get that in the original trilogy with like mass relays and stuff, but then they normalize it almost immediately. And it's like, cool, there's faster than light travel thanks to these mass relays, but then, you know, everyone's like, well, yeah, of course there is, why wouldn't there be? These things have always been around here, it's perfectly normal.
Yeah.
And in this game, is that a lot of that crazy stuff is portrayed as more weird, I guess.
I think that's a cool way to kind of start things off, so you can kind of build it gradually.
And so, I mean, they obviously have left open the door for a lot more development on that plot line, because a lot of those questions don't get answered. Like, you don't really learn who these people were, or why they made all this stuff, or who their enemy was, or where they went. I think, I mean, obviously, it seems now like we don't really know where the series is going to go from here. Maybe they'll get to make another game, but who knows if it'll be like in Andromeda. I think even though they've stumbled coming out of the gate this one, there's too much promise behind what they've set up for it to die now, I guess. I don't want to see that happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Even if it's a rocky start, I think they could still take it. I still think they could take it to great heights.
Well, I think they can improve it, and I think that if over time the game kind of stays on the trajectory it is now, where people are starting to really enjoy it and kind of actually see what it has to offer beyond, you know, videos about funny faces, like I think it could kind of rebound from that and keep going, and I hope it does, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of waiting and seeing. I think, you know, even if this game's development is a little bit rocky, those people have all got a lot of valuable experience under their belts now. They get it and welcome a lot of feedback from the people that play the games. And I've always been amazed at the stoicism with which they take like people's, you know, awful comments on Twitter or whatever.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's not easy at all.
But they, I think if nothing else, they've always shown that they're willing to listen, even if I think sometimes they interpret the feedback in weird ways. If you end up playing the game and you have something to say about it, shout out on like Twitter or on like a forum or something. I'm gonna cut it there and let you talk about Breath of the Wild.
Okay, so my game's kind of the opposite case of yours, where Breath of the Wild has been a critical darling, but as time goes on, where with Andromeda, I've been seeing a lot of the conversation shift to the game's good points. Out of kind of the honeymoon period of Breath of the Wild, the past week or two, I've been seeing a lot more criticism of the game. And not like this game is bad. I mean, obviously some people are not going to like it. Not everyone's going to like everything.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have been more willing to even suggest that Breath of the Wild might not be perfect. So I'm going to start with the things that I really liked. Generally, I'm not an open world guy, which kind of, full disclosure, automatically predisposes me to not fully love this game because it is an open world game. However, I will say that the actual world that they built is very, very well put together. It feels very intentional. Like it doesn't feel copy pasted, which is common, I think, with open world games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have not played Breath of the Wild, full disclosure, but I have seen a lot of gameplay of it, both online, and one of my roommates has been playing it religiously since purchasing the game.
Yeah. Some of the, I'll talk about later about some of the things that are in those areas that are kind of copy pasty, but the actual areas themselves are very well designed. It feels like a very, like a real living world. There's a lot of blank space, which I don't have a problem with as much as I would in another game. One reason is because horses, taming horses is a big part of the game. And it feels really good to be going across them. There's lots of fast travel options. Even when there's kind of a big space between areas, it feels real and it feels like there's something. If you go around looking, you'll find something. Basic design philosophy of the game is freedom. It was designed kind of to be like the first Zelda, which I think people remember it as being a little more open than maybe it is. I think most people are going to play the game the same way every time and go through the same dungeons in the same order. But it's a game that doesn't give you necessarily a lot of direction at the beginning. You have to kind of figure out what to do. And Breath of the Wild is like that. I think the best example, the final dungeon, which is basically an infiltration of Hyrule Castle, which is where Ganon is. You can approach Hyrule Castle the moment you get off the kind of tutorial plateau. They tell you, they're like, you could go there now. Ganon will probably destroy you, but if you want to, go for it. It's also terrifying. Like, legitimately, I was scared to go near it, and there's a bunch of the actual Hyrule field that I didn't explore because I didn't want to get near the castle. Like, it was actually kind of scary. But when you actually do want to go there, you can approach from any angle. I went there a little bit earlier in the game because there's a quest where you have to go pick up Link's memories. And you have to basically go to places that Zelda took pictures of in the past. And one of them is like right outside her room. I'll admit, I looked it up. I wanted to see like if it was possible to get there like at the kind of level I was at, or if I should just go there when I do the final quest. Because I wanted to get them all in order. I didn't want to see the final memory until I'd seen that one. And there's an extra one once you've collected all of them. But I ran from the back side of the castle to an area where there's not a lot of enemies and you can climb stuff and you can pretty much avoid everything. And the final time you go there, you can do the same thing. You can kind of go from the side and do a lot of climbing, or you can go in the front door and fight everything, which is what I did because by that time I felt like I was kind of powerful and I was like, I feel like it'd be more cinematic if I ride my horse into the front gate. And, I ended up getting blown up pretty hard and falling off a cliff. And I managed to save myself and go into like a mine, and then I went into like the prison of the castle, which is like really cool. It was kind of like it felt like a very organic adventure where the mine is one way you could go in. You don't have to go through that way. I ended up getting kind of sidetracked and going through a couple different ways, and eventually I got in the castle. The actual castle itself, I was really disappointed you don't really do anything in. Like, as soon as you go in there, you fight Ganon. I really wanted there to be like a little more actual castle dungeon. But in terms of the idea that you could approach that part of the game from any way you want, you can fight a lot of enemies or you can just climb and be stealthy. Like, that was really cool. That was very unique and it felt really real. Like I said, it felt organic.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially having like the final dungeon be kind of approachable with any of your choice of the skills you've built up to that point. I like that idea.
Yeah. And the whole game is kind of structured like that. You can do everything in any order that you want. That's not a huge deal to me. I think it's cool. I think it's really cool. I don't necessarily need that. A lot of people kind of love that freedom. Like I said in our last podcast, I'm the kid that wants, the Harry Potter Lego set. I don't want, regular Legos. I don't want to build something myself, but I'll build the thing you told me to build, and then I'll kind of within that framework, I'll have a lot of fun. So I normally like a more kind of prescribed, kind of handcrafted experience where with some freedom. Obviously, you don't want to feel like you're on rails. But I think that their approach to the gameplay from that angle of freedom is really good, because you can approach conflict from so many different angles. You can set stuff on fire. You can use the fire to create an updraft so that you can go into bullet time when you're firing an arrow. You can use your bombs to distract enemies if you want to like run into their like hideout and grab stuff. There's a lot of kind of interactions that you don't really think about. If you get shot with an electric arrow and you're carrying metal stuff, it's going to hurt more. Things like that. There's a lot of detail and care put into the mechanics of the world, and it makes it feel really alive. As I'm going to say later, I think that one of the game's major faults is a lack of items and a lack of kind of different abilities for Link. But the ingenuity that you can have going into a fight is really, really cool. And I think a lot of games can kind of learn from that.
Yeah, I've seen you can do a lot of silly things with some of the tools you have. Like if there's a guy who's going to swing a club at you, you can freeze the club and then he'll try and swing at you with nothing.
Oh, really? I never did that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw something like that on YouTube.
Yeah.
There's a lot of little hidden interactions between different things in the world.
Yeah, I really like that aspect to it, because in a lot of the thing is, a lot of that stuff happens by accident, and that's what's really cool.
Yeah,
like you freeze something by accident, or like you'll freeze yourself by accident, but it'll end up working in your favor. Like things like that are really, really cool. And the atmosphere of the game I love, like the actual content of the world. As someone who kind of likes post-apocalyptic things. You're waking up after 100 years after you lost the fight. Like you had your own, there's an entire Zelda game that happened already, but at the end you lost, and you're waking up 100 years later kind of in the aftermath of that. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that has to do with the world and kind of the state of it, and it's very beautiful in kind of that fun destroyed towns kind of way.
Yeah, definitely. I also enjoy that kind of desolate beauty.
And you don't see that much in fantasy games.
Yeah.
I think Dark Souls is probably the best example, but like you don't see that kind of, abandoned places that have just been destroyed and, society's kind of crumbling. And I mean, Breath of the Wild isn't in any way, shape, or form as dire a place as anywhere in the Dark Souls universe. Like there's still a lot of life to it.
Yeah,
and a lot of happiness.
Yeah, people are getting along actually pretty well for all things considered.
Oh yeah. Well, because I mean the kind of central conceit is that Zelda is keeping Ganon at bay, and when you wake up, she is like just about to stop. Like she has held him back for 100 years so that people could recover, but she is gonna lose the fight against him really soon. So she needs you to kind of hurry up and stop taming horses to go save her or whatever. So like the setup of the game is really good. Like everything that the bones of the game are amazing, but I feel like what got lost a little bit were some of the details. So you have these really interesting areas, but a lot of time there's nothing there. Maybe you'll get a quest to go collect some stuff there. There will probably be some enemies, but I hit this point probably 2 weeks in, I would say, of playing it like, let's say like an hour or two a night, where I would get to a new place, I would look it over, I would say, well, that looks cool, and then I would leave, because there's a very limited amount of things that will be in any specific place. There's either a Korok seed or maybe multiple Korok seeds, which will let you expand your inventory. There's 900 of them. You don't need that many. I certainly didn't get that many. I got like, I don't know, 70 or something. There could be shrines, which are, the like puzzle rooms basically, that if every 4 of them that you complete, you get to get more life or more stamina. There will probably be an enemy camp or two. The enemy camps are all copy pasted. Like that's the one thing that just feels like kind of thrown in there. And the further you get into the game, the less you want to even engage them, because the weapon durability system in this game is atrocious. And I've seen so many people trying to defend it. And I mean, it's fun if you like it, obviously, but people get really mad when you bring this up. I'm fine with weapon durability as a concept. I'm fine with the idea that your sword breaks during battle. Like you got to pick up something else, or you got to get a sword from the enemy. But like, it's super not fun when that really cool sword you just found breaks 3 fights in. That's not fun.
I think another aspect of it is that I think they could make that a little bit more interesting, as if like, oh, your thing broke, now you have to kind of like scramble to find something to use, but you're carrying around like a dozen clubs and swords and spears at all times.
Yes. There comes a point where you always have stuff on you, or you have a bunch of really great weapons and you get in one really tough fight and all of them end up breaking. And there's no reward that's usually worth that. Early on in the game, actually, I remember like I would find an enemy with like an amazing weapon that would one-shot me, and I'd have to kind of keep going back to that fight and reloading to kind of figure out how to beat them without getting hit. That was really fun, and the reward would be a really awesome weapon. Late in the game, you have a bunch of awesome weapons. You want to save them for important fights, so you start avoiding fighting at all. Because if I clear out this enemy base, maybe I'll get something worth selling, but I'm probably not going to get an equal amount to what I put in. And the combat's so fun, but I stopped fighting things. I was like, this is like resource-wise, the return on investment is really... And I don't want to be thinking about return on investment when I'm playing a Zelda game. I will say, though, God bless them for making bombs infinite, because that really was nice. That's an incredible move. That should be standard for Zelda games from now on. But yeah, I started to get this open world fatigue where I hit a point where I was like, I feel like I've done all the kinds of things that I can do. I feel like I have enough hearts and stamina. I can make potions to make more hearts and stamina, so it doesn't even matter. I don't need to do any more shrines. All the shrines look the same. Like, they all have the same kind of skin. There's a lot of different challenges, but because you only have, 4 or 5 items that you get in the beginning of the game, like, there's only so many magnet puzzles I can do before I get it. Like, I don't really need to do anymore.
I mean, I think that's always the problem with open world games, is you can create huge and beautiful and detailed environments, but ultimately there's only so many unique but also in-depth and interesting and relevant to like the themes of the game, things that you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. It got to the point where like I said, I would go to an area, I'd kind of look at it and be like, okay, I saw it. And like some of these, like you'd go to a destroyed town, and the first couple of times you see a destroyed town, it's incredible. Like you're walking through these ruins and you like don't know, what you're going to find. Spoiler alert, not much. Like you're going to find some items maybe, but like I wanted more story. Like I wanted, like you were saying, like you could have like a diary. Like there's a couple of diaries in the games where you can go read characters' thoughts, and those are really cool. Like Zelda has one that's really interesting. And a couple other characters have them, but they're always characters that you already know. And I would have loved to be able to go to some of these destroyed places, or some of like the temples. Like there's a lot of temples from earlier Zelda games that are just there. They're destroyed. And I would love to have been able to kind of interact with them in some way. And since I know you like Twilight Princess, I guess the actual like the mirror that leads to the Twilight Realm is like in the game.
Yeah.
But it's destroyed, and there's like a little like that one. There's a little quest there, and this guy is like trying to figure out what was there, and he's trying to read the description. And you like the reward is a shrine, which is like not a great reward for anything once you've been to 100 of them. But like that's really cool. Like that's involving that part of the world in a quest, and that I really like, and I wish they had done more of that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Because a lot of the quests are fetch quests, which like there's only so many of those I really feel like doing.
Yeah, and those are the things that that's the sort of thing I specifically avoided doing when I was playing Andromeda, because there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that like the game didn't make me feel like I was pressured into doing them. Like I could get enough experience and gear and stuff not doing those.
Yeah, and in Breath of the Wild's defense, it's the exact same way. You don't have to do anything in that game. Like other than fighting Ganon, which I mean technically you don't even have to do that. You can just play forever. But like you can go finish the game without having to do anything, which I think makes people a little more defensive when you bring up one of the faults of the game, because like you don't have to do that. It's like, well, but I want to play a game and have fun. Like I want to experience.
It's like
content.
The game's there. I want to play it.
Yes, exactly. But I just reached this point where I was like, I want to end this. Like, not that I'm having a bad time. I was still having a great time. But I didn't feel like I was going to find any more cool things. And I guarantee there's stuff that I missed. I've seen stuff that I missed. I didn't, upgrade everything. But there was a point where like I didn't want to go farming things to upgrade my armor. Like I felt like I had everything I needed to beat the game, and I did. I beat the game, and the last boss was fairly easy, but still pretty fun, and that was cool. But the world started to feel like there just wasn't enough substance to it, gameplay wise. The world itself was amazing. And it was really cool to go around it and just see what was there. But I just wanted a little more from it. And I think part of that, which was a point I didn't even really think about until I saw someone else talk about it, was that the 4 dungeons, there are like 4 dungeons in the game. And they're all basically the same thing too. Like they all have kind of the same, for lack of a better word, tile set. Like they all have the same kind of design, and all of them involve moving parts of the dungeon to access things. But because, again, you have the same number of items at the beginning of the game as you do at the end, they don't give you any really new challenges. It's all variations on magnet stuff, ice stuff, blow stuff up, and freeze stuff in time. And other than I think, at least in my playthrough, the magnet power-up, the magnet thingy, rune, was the one I used probably 90% of the time. The ice was very rare, because, there's not water everywhere. The freezing in time thing, I never really got the hang of, so I didn't use it unless I had to. But there just wasn't a progression, really. Like, I didn't feel like I was learning new skills. I felt like I was just using the same skills over and over again. And it became a little bit stale. Like, I wanted to use new things. I know some people kind of complain when in ZELDA dungeons, especially I think the 3D ones, you go into a dungeon, you get the item of that dungeon, and then you use that item in the dungeon. But to me, that's fun. I don't know. I've just never really had a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, Zelda is a series that's kind of well known for gradually introducing you to new mechanics and items throughout the game.
Yeah. I really started to feel the absence of it when I was kind of further in the game. And I was starting to feel like I wanted new challenges, new kinds of challenges. And the game isn't set up to give you that. It's set up so that you can do everything, which is, a design decision. Like, that's kind of how they wanted to do it. But I really missed that. I missed having different items. I felt like the items we got, the magnet is really fun to use. I like that there's two shapes of bombs a lot. So one kind of rolls down hills, one kind of stays put. But the ice and the time freezing thing, didn't really do it for me. And I didn't feel like they were, kind of worthy of taking those two spots out of, 3 basically. So that was just kind of a bummer. And again, it was like I would go through these dungeons and have fun. But then when I would think back on it, I'd be like, that wasn't really super innovative. Like, maybe there was a couple of puzzles that I really liked and I got stuck on for a long time, but the freedom that they designed the game to have ended up limiting the way that they could design some things.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like they have a few items and tools that you get to use, but they all have a lot of crazy and detailed interactions with everything in the world. But it seems like that means that they couldn't make as many toys for you to play with, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a trade-off, and I know there's plenty of people that, didn't really mind it, but because there's no real leveling, which I don't think there needed to be, your only real means of growing stronger are getting more hearts and stamina, which you do through the shrines. You get some magic spells whenever you clear a dungeon, which is cool. They're all really neat. You get better weapons and armor, maybe. I mean, your weapons break every time you swing them, so that's not always great. So it just felt like I wasn't as different from the beginning of the game as I wanted to be at the end. Like, Link is a character, and a part of that was the items. I think what they have for progression was really good. I did feel like kind of a badass going into the final battle. Like, I had ancient armor that was really good against guardian weapons, and I had a bunch of hearts and stuff, but the challenges in that final dungeon are the same that they've been anywhere else. It's climbing, fighting, and, that's it. There's not kind of the typical Zelda dungeon where you have to go through and use all your items one more time to solve one more puzzle. That kind of thing I really like. And I kind of missed it here, even though what was there was great.
Yeah, I mean, they made the absolute most out of what they had.
Yes, that's exactly what I would say. They made such good use of the mechanics that they had, but there came a point where it was there's only 4 or 5 types of enemies in the game. I maybe there's 10 or something. There's a lot of recolors and stuff, but the enemies that are there are great. I just wanted more. That was everything in the game that was really cool. I just wanted a little bit more of. And I would have taken a smaller game world for that easily. But I think if they were to do another game like this, they could make it a lot bigger and a lot more involved in that way. I think there's, easy solutions for all these things. It was a very different kind of game for them to be making, especially after the last few. So my expectations aren't that it's going to be, the best open world game ever created either.
Yeah, I think it's no secret that we both are we don't necessarily dislike open worlds, but there seems to be a lot of common problems with them that at least matter for us.
Yeah, for sure. As open world games go, it's definitely one that I've enjoyed a lot. There are very few that kind of hold my attention for as long as Breath of the Wild did. And I think part of that's because a lot of open world games I've played are kind of in modern settings or settings like in an Elder Scrolls game. I feel like usually the geographically everything's kind of similar and more realistic, whereas, you know, the Hyrule that exists in Breath of the Wild is ridiculous. Like there's a volcano, and then there's a jungle, and then there's a forest and an ice place, and they're all just fine next to each other. And I think because Zelda is Zelda, you accept that more than you would in an Elder Scrolls game. But for me, that just meant there was a lot more variety in the areas.
Yeah, and that's always important.
Other than that, I guess I would have liked a little more story. There's a lot of little stories. Like there's a lot of characters that have really interesting backgrounds or kind of things to tell you. But the actual, like, I think one of my problems with the game ultimately is that the part of the game that takes place 100 years prior, that, you know, I said earlier, kind of feels like its own Zelda game. I would have liked to live more of that. I felt myself kind of disconnecting a bit with all the memories, like the memory cutscenes, because they were really cool and they had all these really interesting characters that I wasn't interacting with at all. Like you see their ghosts, and like that's kind of cool. And they each get kind of a nice little send-off scene. But especially with Zelda, I feel like seeing myself have interactions with her wasn't the same as, you know, in Skyward Sword or Wind Waker, where she's part of your adventure.
Yeah, I get that. From what I saw, it looked like you really only kind of got a taste of it.
Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back to some of the open world stuff. Like, I would have liked a little more theming in, or I guess like NPCs being in some of these old destroyed areas, either trying to rebuild them or trying to like, there are a few kind of archaeology minded characters in the game who are really interested in some of the ancient stuff that's around. I would have liked more of that. Like, I would have loved a quest where you kind of are an archaeologist and you kind of go around to these different places and you find out more about them. Like, there's this really big, like, kind of city, this, like, old city that you go to, and it's just kind of a path just to get from one place to another, and there's lots of enemies in it. But you don't really learn anything about it. Like, there's a couple NPCs that mention it, but you don't actually learn. And there's a lot of environmental storytelling, for sure. They put a lot of effort into kind of giving you the story of a place visually, but that's not enough for me. I want to know everything, or at least as much as I can. So I think I would have just liked a little more kind of fleshing out of some of these places and storylines that, you know, again, because that wasn't really the focus of the game, they didn't really do.
Zelda's always had stories, but it's not necessarily the most story-focused series.
That was one reason I loved Skyward Sword, actually, because I felt like it was kind of a more story-driven game and a more character-driven game. Like, Zelda always has a lot of really fun side characters, but because obviously Link is mute and they want him to be kind of like a stand-in for you, the character-driven side of Zelda has always been a little bit lacking. But I really liked Zelda's story in Skyward Sword and how it kind of paralleled your own. And in this one, Zelda is amazing. Breath of the Wild Zelda is an amazing character, but she's also in a box for the entire game. And then at the end, she just kind of gets out and is like, hey, that was cool. Great. So, you know, if she had been more involved in the active plot of the game, other than being kind of a voice in your head, that would have been kind of cool. I realized that she kind of had a purpose in holding Ganon back, so, you know, I'm not going to mince hairs. And I don't want it to sound like, you know, I didn't enjoy the game, because I legitimately loved the game. I just got to a point where I felt like there was a lot of stuff that didn't matter to me, which is fine. I mean, not everyone has to 100% a game. I know, you know, Aonuma has said he didn't expect people to want 100% this game. But there was a point where some of the technical and mechanical decisions started to really stand out to me. And I was like, I am enjoying this so much that I need it to end. Like, I need to go through the story while I'm still, like, super into it. And, you know, I went and began and it was fine. Which is, again, a testament to the way that they designed it. Was that I was able to go beacon. I didn't have to do everything. I didn't have to upgrade all my armor. And, you know, farm a million, like, toenails or whatever.
Yeah, no, like, I 100% got into that mode playing Andromeda too, because I did my thing where I slipped back into trying to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I'm doing some random side quests where I'm like, this is getting boring, because there's not really a lot of substance to some of this stuff. And so then I'm just like, forget all of it. I don't care if my quest log has a billion things in it. We're just going to finish the story.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I got to.
And so I did that, and I think I look back on the game a lot more favorably now because of it. 'Cause I could have done a lot more boring stuff before I finished the game if I'd stuck trying to do everything.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the the nice things about that kind of gameplay design. Because if you're in a single player RPG and you're starting to get tired of the story, you might still have 30 hours of story left.
Yeah.
Like that's rough. But at least, in Breath of the Wild, at literally any point in the game except for the beginning like tutorial place, if at any point of the game you start to get bored, you can go beat it.
Yep.
Which is pretty cool.
It's obviously it's not that extreme in Andromeda, but like the main story is actually kind of minimal. I'd say there's like maybe 10 main story missions tops in the entire game, and that's including like the intro one too. So
they're expecting that you're gonna kind of go around and
I think
do all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, maybe they didn't say it as explicitly, but I think it's another game where they expect you to do as much side stuff as you want to, but then it's easiest to finish the story if you want. I don't know how scaling difficulty works in that game, but I think you could have done the final missions a lot earlier than I did them, because I didn't really have much trouble.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think options are always good. I think it's always good to have different approaches you can take. I think it's always good to make as much stuff in a game optional as possible. I'm all for that. And I know a lot of people get kind of salty. Like whenever, like one example is people want to add an easy mode to Dark Souls. And people are like, that would ruin the game. But like, if you're not going to play it, it doesn't matter. But there are people, and I'm not going to name names, me, who would love to see more of that game and more of the story, but they find the gameplay so gratingly unpleasant that they're never going to. If Dark Souls had an easy mode, I would play the crap out of it because I think it's a very interesting world and I think it's a fun battle system. I don't have the patience to go through all the stuff it wants me to go through.
I get the argument, but I also feel like you're kind of like underestimating people when you say that, because it's like, it's true that the difficulty is kind of an important part of the story in the world, but people are kind of smart enough to appreciate that even if they're playing it on the easy mode or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's this kind of viewpoint that I think people don't realize that they have, which is that the way that they enjoy something has to be the only pure way to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Because going back to the Dark Souls example, the design of Dark Souls wouldn't change with an easy mode. You would still have your same game. I think people are afraid that it wouldn't be hard anymore, but they could specifically make it harder because they have a mode for people who don't want to do it. There are RPGs now where you have the option to skip battles. You can turn off random battles if you want to. That is incredible.
Yeah, I know Bravely Default did that, right?
Yeah, Bravely Default does it. Which, as an adult with a job who normally plays games late at night, sometimes I don't want to run through an area and have to fight 15 battles. Sometimes I want to go get a story point done or something.
Yeah.
And obviously, the more you skip, the more you're going to be, to pay for it later. But there are games where they mitigate that too. And I think that's just really cool. Like, I don't think anything in a game needs to be mandatory. The more options you give people, the better it is.
Yeah, I know. The upcoming Persona 5, they have an easy or like story difficulty, and it doesn't remove the battles, but like apparently you get like 1 million XP and money from like every battle or something like that, and it makes it never be a problem.
Right. That's totally the thing I would do. Like, if I'm gonna go through a game for a second time, or I just like want to experience a story again and I've already played through it, like I'll totally do that. That's what I did when I was playing Final Fantasy VIII. I was playing it on stream a few months ago, and I got to a point where I was really enjoying the game, but I was like, I kind of just want to do story. I don't want to grind or anything. So I just turned on a bunch of cheats that the game gave me. If you buy it on Steam, and it was so fun. Like it was still a really nice experience. So the one thing I will say for open world games that I really love is that idea that you can kind of customize it to yourself, and I think that Breath of the Wild did an incredible job of that. It sounds like Mass Effect did too.
Yeah, I think Breath of the Wild probably does a lot better job of it. I don't know, especially coming off the trilogy in Mass Effect where it wasn't open and like every mission more or less had like some sort of important story thread or interesting story thread going through it.
Right.
It's hard to get into the mindset of being like, there's a lot of stuff in this game and a lot of it is not in depth and maybe not super fun. And so maybe like do a small portion of that in addition to the interesting story stuff, and that's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think if you play these sorts of games with that mindset, then it suddenly gets a lot better.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of times we kind of push ourselves to want to do everything, but you don't need to. Like, you can just play a game at your own pace and just do whatever you want and then have a really good time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's sort of a thing like, if you spend $60 on a game, you want to see as much of the game as possible, but
Absolutely.
you don't want that to come at the cost of enjoying it too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, did you have anything else you wanted to wrap up with then?
I'm trying to think. I think we covered. Well, both of these are huge games.
Yeah,
Like,
I just feel like
there's no way to cover them comprehensively.
yeah, I know. It would take forever. But I think because of like how all over the map in terms of quality different parts of the game are, there's a ton of stuff that I think is worth talking about, but
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
for sure. You can't because I was thinking too, as I was talking, I'm like, it's gonna sound like I hate Breath of the Wild, but I loved it so much. But like,
Yeah, I mean, I felt like the same way when I was talking about the game. Like, I talked about a lot of the problems, and I did talk about the things I liked, but I don't know that I actually talked about, like, why I didn't mind the problems so much, but
yeah, I think that's just the whole point of this episode. You can love something very dearly and still admit that there are problems with it. To varying degrees. Like, you don't have to admit that there's problems with something, but it doesn't invalidate the fun you had if something wasn't perfect. Like, I don't regret 1 second of playing Breath of the Wild. That doesn't mean I don't have a lot of problems with it, but like, I don't regret it for a second. I bought a Switch for it. Like, I was like, let's go all in. Like, I'm gonna do this up, and I feel great about it.
yeah, like, I have no regrets playing Andromeda. I'm disappointed about some things because I, like many other fans of the series, have pretty high standards for it, and it didn't meet all of them.
Yeah.
But there were also new and interesting things that I liked a lot, and I want to see them continue it in the future.
All right, well, that's going to be it for us. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Subscribe if you want to see more. Let me know down in the comments if there's any topics you want us to cover or if you have any thoughts on the topics we talked about today. And I will see you soon.